I'm Jarrad Brown, Australian expat financial planner based here in Singapore. Welcome to my video series where we tackle the tough personal finance questions asked by Australian expats. Today, I'm here to talk to you about a concept called rentvesting. Now, we'll get into exactly what that is, but the reason it's so important and I wanted to spend time addressing it today is because we find a common question is asked by a lot of Australian expats, particularly those that are thinking about moving home. Should I buy or should I rent my home? So let's start exploring what rentvesting is and some of the pros and cons to doing so. So what exactly is rentvesting? So the rent component of this refers to the property that you live in, your main residence or primary residence, if you will. So with this property, we're actually renting it out. So we're paying a landlord to live in their property and paying them an agreed upon rental price. Now the vesting component refers to investing in a property somewhere else. Now this may be in the same street, suburb, state, or it may be completely different. But we're purchasing an investment property at the same time that we rent out to somebody else and generate a rental income. Now the logic of doing so may not be that clear just yet, but bear with me, we'll start exploring when it might make sense. Rentvesting is becoming an incredibly popular strategy, particularly for those who may not be able to save up their deposit, may not be able to afford to purchase in the area that they'd like to live, or it may not actually be a great investment or great investment case to buy the property or buy in the area that you actually want to live in. So let's start exploring some of the pros of rentvesting. There are 6 key benefits when it comes to rentvesting. Now the first of these is being able to reside in your preferred location. As I said, a lot of people may face difficulty in saving up enough or maybe not being able to borrow enough to live in the property or buy in the suburb that they're looking to live in. Whereas renting in that suburb may actually be very affordable. So this can be a great solution to fix that problem. The second key benefit of rentvesting is the flexibility of where you live. Now, you may just be somebody who likes to move house often, change is as good as a holiday as they say, or you may be working around relocated on a regular basis with your employer. So rentvesting can be a great way to avoid being locked into a particular suburb or state, whilst giving you still the exposure to the property market with your investment property. The third key benefit of rentvesting is of course the tax benefits associated. Now here I'm referring to negative gearing, one of the very few attractive components of the Australian tax system. Now again, we are talking about tax here, so as always, seek professional advice, speak with your accountant or your qualified financial advisor. But having an investment property can allow you to generate some tax benefits, which may allow you to reduce your overall tax position, particularly when it comes to your salary in Australia. The fourth key benefit of rentvesting is putting yourself in a position where you can actually build up an investment property portfolio. Now you may continue to rent whilst buying an investment property every 1, 2, 5 years and continue to build that over time. This may be beneficial, it may give you the flexibility of changing where you reside, but it also allows you to continue to build up your wealth. So it can be a great value add in that way. The fifth key benefit of rentvesting is the rental income itself. Now rental income over time will typically increase by inflation. There will obviously be fluctuations over time, but it can be a great source of retirement or passive income. As your mortgage or your liability balances decrease over time, you'll find that there's free cash flow starting to come out of this property or property portfolio. So it can be a great long-term income source for you. The sixth key benefit when it comes to rentvesting is what is referred to as your borrowing capacity. Now you may find that to get into the home of your dreams, you can't actually borrow enough money from the bank just yet. Now one option obviously is you could just wait until you earn more money or your expenses have reduced. But quite often that doesn't happen terribly quickly. Or you may not be able to save up enough of a deposit and you find that the banks won't give you enough money to get you into that property. Now, by investing in a property, it may even be in the same street or suburb. It may not be your dream home, but it may allow you to get exposure to that same market. So it can be a great way to get you onto the property ladder whilst facing those borrowing capacity limitations. Now let's start exploring some of the drawbacks when it comes to rent vesting and some of the things that you'll want to consider before jumping in. The first, and probably the most obvious, is you're the tenant. Now, for anyone who doesn't like the insecurity of having a landlord tell you what you can and can't stick to the wall, or booting you out, or facing rental inspections, this may be a significant drawback. Now, if you've spent your time as an Australian expat and lived all over the world in many rental properties, it may just be something that you're used to. But it is certainly something that you want to consider before going down the path of renting a property. The second key drawback when it comes to rent vesting is you're not going to get your hands on most of the first home buyers grants. Most of the grants in the states and territories in Australia are limited to owner-occupiers buying their home, which means that for those that are investing in a property, we're typically not going to get the benefit of those. Now, we may be able to utilise them in future if and when we do decide to buy our own home, but I'd certainly suggest doing your homework and working out how important those grants are for you and whether they're essential as part of your long-term strategy. The third key potential drawback when it comes to rent vesting is capital gains tax. Now, under the Australian tax system, on our main residence, our primary residence, we are typically not exposed to capital gains tax, which means that we could sell a property that is treated as our main residence and not be faced with that capital gains tax liability. Now, if it's an investment property, however, this is treated very differently and would form part of your taxable income. So it's not the be all and end all. Tax is not something we need to avoid. Tax is something we need to figure it out and add into our calculations. Now again, we're talking about tax here. Speak to your accountant, speak to your qualified financial planner. The fourth and often incorrectly calculated drawback of rent vesting is the whole argument of rent versus paying down your mortgage. Why am I paying rent? Why am I paying down somebody else's mortgage when I could be using that money to pay down my own? Now, often what we ignore in this statement and this question is instead of paying somebody else's mortgage, we're paying the bank interest. Now, those two numbers may be the same. We are at record low interest rate levels, so in many cases they won't be. But it's important not just to consider where rates are now, because most of the time our mortgage is going to be 20, 25, 30 years. It's important to consider the long-term average. So are we actually going to be ahead by paying interest as opposed to paying our rental repayments? It's important to work out what that difference looks like, because that'll start to give you what is called the hurdle rate, i.e. how much the property needs to grow by before it makes sense to actually go down the path of buying instead of renting. Again, important to consider the tax implications here. Is that interest repayment tax deductible? Is the rent partly deductible if you're working from home? Are there other things to factor into that calculation? Again, important to seek advice here. I hope that's been helpful. I hope that's shed some light on rent vesting as a strategy, what you might want to think about before jumping in with both feet, and who you might want to seek advice from. Thank you very much for joining us. If you have anything to add or you have any questions that we haven't yet covered, fire them through. We'd love to hear from you, and maybe we can even turn them into a future video. Thank you again for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next time.